Candace Washington stood at the altar of the Beverly Hilton, her lungs burning as her fiancé, Jordan, leaned into the microphone. "Guess she had her cake and ate it too," he smirked, his eyes roaming her figure with a cruelty that made the room turn cold. "I hope the foundation of this hotel holds." The roar of laughter from the groomsmen hit her like a physical blow. The shame was a hot, stinging poison in her veins. She had 5 seconds. 5 seconds to walk away in tears or to burn the bridge while she was still standing on it. Candace didn't cry. She ripped the lace sleeves from her arms, threw her $10,000 bouquet at Jordan's feet, and looked directly at the man in the front row, the man everyone else was too afraid to acknowledge. "I am done being a pawn," she whispered. Min Dae-hyun stood, his presence commanding a silence so absolute it felt heavy. "I believe the lady requires a different groom," he announced. He looked at Jordan like he was a bug on a windshield. "You are dismissed. Before we see if Candace actually takes the hand of the city's most dangerous man, I need to know. Are you part of the My Afro Korean Boss Stories family, or are you just passing through? If you value stories where the underdog finally bites back, hit that subscribe button right now. If you're going to leave us hanging, at least tell us in the comments where you're watching from so we know who we're losing. Let's get into the fallout." The silence in the ballroom was thick, oily, and suffocating. Jordan's face had shifted from a smug mask of superiority to a pale, twitching mess of confusion. "Dae-hyun," Jordan stammered, his voice cracking. This is a family matter. You can't just—" "I just did," Dae-hyun interrupted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stepped onto the altar, his polished black shoes clicking against the marble. He looked at Candace. Up close, his eyes weren't just dark. They were observant, tracing the defiance in her jaw rather than the fit of her dress. Candace felt her father's grip on her arm tighten, and not in support, but in a panicked, crushing warning. She ignored it. She felt the eyes of 500 of LA's elite boring into her back, waiting for her to crumble. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand in Dae-hyun's. His skin was cool, his grip steady as a mountain. "Let's go," she said, her voice finally finding its edge. They walked down the aisle together. It wasn't the graceful glide she had practiced for months. It was a march. Behind them, Jordan began to shout, his words dissolving into a desperate, ugly rage that only made his previous insults look pathetic. Outside, the California sun was blinding. A fleet of black SUVs sat idling at the curb. Dae-hyun led her to the lead vehicle, a reinforced sedan that looked like it could withstand a tank shell. He held the door for her, a gesture of old-world chivalry that felt jarring given the circumstances. As the door clicked shut, sealing them in a tomb of leather and silence, the adrenaline that had fueled Candace's walk began to evaporate. She looked down at her hand, still resting in her lap. It was shaking violently. "You have a choice, Candace," Dae-hyun said, looking out the tinted window as the hotel faded behind them. "I can drop you at your bakery. Jordan will spend the next hour figuring out how to sue you and the next month figuring out how to ruin you. Or you come with me." Candace looked at him. "Why me? You could have any woman in that room." Dae-hyun turned his head, his gaze settling on her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "In that room, I saw 500 people laughing at a woman who creates art. I don't care for people who destroy things they couldn't possibly build. I need a wife who understands the weight of a kingdom. And you have a warrior's focus." He leaned back, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. "But let be clear, if you take my name, you take my enemies. Jordan is a mosquito. My rivals are wolves. Are you ready to trade your apron for a crown?" Candace thought of her bakery, the smell of burnt sugar, and the way Jordan had tried to make her feel small. She thought of the emptiness she had felt for years. "The apron stays," Candace said, her voice steadying, "but I'll take the crown." The mansion in the Hollywood Hills was less of a home and more of a fortress of glass and cold steel. As the heavy iron gates hissed shut behind the SUV, Candace realized there was no turning back. The city lights of Los Angeles twinkled below like fallen diamonds, But up here, the air felt thin and dangerously quiet. Dae-hyun led her through the massive pivot door into a foyer that smelled of expensive sandalwood and floor wax. He didn't offer her a tour. He led her straight to a glass-walled study where a single sheet of paper sat on a mahogany desk. "My lawyers drafted this while we were in the car," Dae-hyun said, gesturing to the document. "It is a contract of mutual necessity. 1 year. You will live here, under my protection. You will attend all social and syndicate functions as my wife. In exchange, I will provide the capital to expand your business and, more importantly, I will ensure Jordan Vance never breathes your name in public again." Candace walked to the desk, her lace train rustling against the polished floor. She scanned the lines of text. Section 4.2, Personal Conduct. The parties shall maintain a public image of marital bliss. Private quarters shall remain separate. Physical intimacy is neither required nor permitted under the terms of this transaction. "A transaction," Candace whispered, the word tasting like ash. "Is that all I am to you, Dae-hyun? A strategic acquisition?" Dae-hyun stepped into the light. He had removed his tuxedo jacket, revealing the holstered firearm tucked against his ribs. The sight of it made her stomach drop. A stark reminder that this wasn't a fairy tale. It was a merger. "I don't believe in romance, Candace. It's a liability in my world. My mother was a romantic, and it's what allowed her enemies to find her heart." He walked closer, stopping just inches away. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back, and for a moment the coldness in his eyes flickered. "But I do believe in value. You are a woman of immense talent and untapped strength. You're being wasted on men like Jordan. I am offering you a throne. All you have to do is sign." Candace looked at the pen. She thought of her father's crumbling finances, though she didn't yet know the full extent of his debt, and she thought of the way her mother had always told her to keep the peace with Jordan. Signing this wasn't just about protection. It was about taking up space in a world that had always told her to be smaller. She picked up the pen and signed her name in bold, looping letters. "Welcome to the Golden Dragon, Mrs. Min," he said softly. He signaled to a man standing in the shadows, a silent, scarred bodyguard named Ren. "Ren will show you to your suite. It has been stocked with clothes in your size. Real clothes, not the rags Jordan forced you to wear to hide yourself." As Candace followed Ren through the labyrinthine halls, she felt the sheer scale of the house. It was filled with priceless art, monochrome paintings and ancient Korean pottery, but it felt hollow. When she reached her suite, she found it was larger than her entire apartment in Pasadena. On the bed lay a silk robe and a box of high-end skincare. She stripped off the wedding dress, the ivory lace now nothing more than a heap of garbage on the floor. She stepped into the shower, scrubbing the smell of Jordan's expensive cologne and the Hilton's hairspray off her skin until it was raw. When she emerged, wrapped in the silk robe, she wandered to the window. Below, she could see the silhouette of Dae-hyun standing by the infinity pool, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked solitary, a king ruling over a kingdom of shadows. Suddenly, a notification chirped on her phone. It was an alert from a popular food blog. Pastry queen or gold digger, Candace Washington flees wedding with syndicate boss, suppliers pull out as moral turpitude clauses are triggered. Her heart hammered. Jordan was already moving. He was attacking the one thing she truly owned, her reputation. She felt a sob rise in her throat, but she pushed it down. She wasn't a victim anymore. A soft knock sounded at the door. It was Ren. He held a small silver tray with a single glass of water and a small leather-bound book. "The boss said you might have trouble sleeping," Ren said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "He found this in his private collection. He thought you'd find the techniques interesting." Candace took the book. It was a first-edition manual on traditional Korean temple suites, delicate, intricate art forms made of honey, flour, and ginger. There was a small note tucked inside the cover. "The foundation will hold." Sleep. She climbed into the massive bed, the weight of the silk blankets heavy on her tired limbs. She was in the den of a dragon, surrounded by enemies and bound by a contract of cold ink. But as she looked at the book, She realized Dae-hyun had seen the one thing no one else ever had, that her work was her soul. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but as she drifted into a restless sleep, she knew one thing for certain. The girl who had walked down that aisle was dead. The Queen was just beginning to wake up. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the mansion like a spotlight, but for Candace there was no warmth. By 8 a.m., her phone was a weapon of mass destruction. Notifications screamed from every angle, cancelled, voided, discontinued. She stood in the centre of the state-of-the-art kitchen, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the carnage. Jordan had worked fast. He had used his family's influence to poison her reputation. Her dairy supplier in Chino had pulled her contract. Her organic flour distributor had lost her latest shipment. But the killing blow was the email from her landlord in Pasadena. Due to recent publicity surrounding your associations, your lease has been terminated effective immediately under the Public Morality Clause. Please vacate the premises by midnight. Associations, Candace whispered, her eyes stinging. I've spent 10 years building that shop, and he burns it down in 10 hours. He didn't burn it, a voice rumbled from the doorway. Dae-hyun stood there dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that made him look like a shadow carved from stone. He's trying to starve you. It's a classic siege tactic. It's working, she snapped, turning to face him. The blog comments are calling me a mob wife. My suppliers are scared of being associated with syndicate money. Jordan isn't just taking my shop. He's taking my name. Dae-hyun walked toward her, his presence filling the sterile modern kitchen. He reached out, not to touch her, but to take her phone from her shaking hands. He laid it face down on the marble island. Jordan Vance thinks he is playing a game of checkers. He thinks that by removing your pieces, he wins. Dae-hyun's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in the obsidian depths. He forgets that I own the board. What are you going to do? Threaten them? Candace asked, her voice laced with a mixture of hope and horror. Fear is a temporary motivator, Candace. I prefer leverage. He gestured for her to follow him. They took the elevator down to the sub-level of the mansion. When the doors opened, Candace gasped. It wasn't a dungeon or a wine cellar. It was a commercial-grade culinary laboratory. Gleaming stainless steel, industrial convection ovens, a walk-in freezer the size of her old apartment, and marble slabs perfectly chilled for sugar work. This is mine, she asked, her voice barely a breath. It is your fortress, Dae-hyun replied. While Jordan spends his morning calling your landlords, I spent mine acquiring the distribution company that supplies his family's luxury hotels. By noon he will realize that if he touches your flour, I touch his profit margins. Candace walked to the center of the room, her fingers brushing the cool surface of a professional stand mixer. The sheer power of his protection was intoxicating, but it felt like a trap. Why go this far? The contract didn't say you had to build me a kingdom. Dae-hyun stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. You are my wife now, Candace. To the world, your failure is my failure. But more than that. He paused, his gaze lingering on her face, with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. I want to see what you create when you aren't afraid of the cost of butter. The moment was shattered by the sound of a distant alarm. Ren appeared at the door, his face grim. Boss, we have a situation in Pasadena. Vandals. Candace didn't wait for an explanation. She ran to the garage. Dae-hyun followed, his silence more terrifying than any shout. When they arrived at her small bakery in Pasadena, Candace's heart broke. The front windows had been smashed. Thick black spray paint covered the storefront. Mafia slut was sprawled across the glass where her logo used to be. Inside, the displays were shattered. Her signature sugar sculptures, the ones that had taken her weeks to perfect, were nothing but colourful dust on the floor. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, some filming on their phones, their faces filled with the same mocking pity she had seen at the Hilton. Don't get out of the car, Dae-hyun commanded. That's my life in there, Candace cried, her hand on the door handle. Wait! Dae-hyun made a single phone call. Within minutes, 3 black vans pulled up. Men in suits emerged, but they weren't carrying guns. They were carrying heavy-duty cleaning equipment and plywood. They moved with a military precision that was chilling to behold. Dae-hyun finally opened his door and stepped out. The crowd went silent. The air seemed to vibrate with the sheer weight of his authority. He didn't look at the graffiti. He looked at the person filming closest to the car. "Delete it," Dae-hyun said softly. It wasn't a request. The man paled and dropped his phone. Dae-hyun turned to Candace, who had stepped out onto the sidewalk, her shoes crunching on broken glass. She felt the weight of every eye on her, the judgment, the weight-shaming whispers she knew were happening behind those screens. She felt herself wanting to shrink, to disappear into the lace of her memory. But then she felt a hand on the small of her back. It was firm, warm, and unapologetic. "Look at them, Candace," Dae-hyun whispered in her ear. "They are spectators. You are the protagonist. If you bow your head now, you give them the satisfaction of your shame." Candace took a deep breath. She felt the warrior's focus he had spoken of ignite in her chest like a slow-burning ember. She looked at the ruined shop, then at the cameras, and finally at Dae-hyun. "I'm not going to clean this up," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm going to leave it. Let the city see what Jordan Vance did. And tomorrow, I'm going to bake the most expensive cake this city has ever seen in that kitchen of yours. I'm going to make them crawl to me for a taste of what they tried to destroy." A genuine slow smile spread across Dae-hyun's face, the first one she had truly seen. It changed him, softening the hard edges of his face and making him look devastatingly handsome. "There she is," he murmured. "The Queen." As they drove away from the wreckage, Candace looked back one last time. Jordan had tried to break her spirit by attacking her art, but he had inadvertently given her something much more dangerous, a reason to fight. And beside her sat the man who had provided the weapons. The contract was a year long, but as Candace watched Dae-hyun's profile in the dim light of the car, she realized the war was just beginning. Jordan had fired the first shot, but she and the dragon were going to finish the battle. The mansion became a gilded cage of silence, broken only by the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the sub-level kitchen. Candace threw herself into her work, the rhythmic kneading of dough and the precise tempering of chocolate becoming her only therapy. In the kitchen, she was the sovereign. Everywhere else, she was a ghost. Dae-hyun was rarely home during the day. He moved in a world of whispers and high-stakes negotiations, leaving Candace to wander the art-filled halls alone. Yet his presence was everywhere. She noticed it in the small things, her favourite brand of high-fat European butter suddenly appearing in the pantry, or the way the security staff, men who looked like they could kill with a glance, would bow their heads slightly as she passed, murmuring, "Ma'am." One Tuesday night, unable to sleep as the wind howled through the Hollywood Hills, Candace crept up to the main floor. She found herself drawn to the library, a room she usually avoided because it felt too much like Dae-hyun's inner sanctum. The walls were lined with leather-bound volumes and ancient scrolls, smelling of old paper and the faint, spicy scent of his cologne. As she reached for a book on Renaissance architecture, a voice drifted from the shadows. "The third shelf on the right has the better collection on structural design." Candace gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Dae-hyun was sitting in a high-backed wing chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long, flickering shadows across his face. "I didn't mean to intrude," Candace whispered. "It is your house, Candace. You cannot intrude on your own life." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit. You look like you've been fighting demons all night." She sat, her silk robe trailing on the rug. "Just one demon. Jordan's legal team filed an injunction against my new business name today. He's claiming it's too similar to his family's holding company. It's a reach, but it's delaying my reopening." Dae-hyun took a slow sip of his drink. He's a man who fights with paper because he's afraid of blood. It's tiresome. "Is that how you fight?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her fear. "With blood?" Dae-hyun leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp line of his jaw. "I fight with whatever is necessary to protect what belongs to me." Sometimes that is a contract, sometimes it is silence, and sometimes. He didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of it hung in the air. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with a new kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with contracts or enemies. Candace found herself watching the way his thumb traced the rim of his glass. "Why did you stop me from hiding in the car at the bakery?" she asked softly. "You could have just handled it and let me stay safe." "Because safety is a lie," Dae-hyun said, his voice a low rumble. "If I kept you in the car, I would have been protecting a victim. I wanted to see the woman who threw her bouquet at a mogul's feet. I wanted to see her own the wreckage." He paused, his gaze softening just slightly, a flicker of something that looked dangerously like admiration. "You are more beautiful when you are angry than when you are compliant." Candace felt a flush creep up her neck. She stood abruptly, the intimacy of the room suddenly feeling like too much. "I should go. I have a 3-tier cake to assemble at dawn." "Candace." She stopped, her back to him. "Don't let him make you feel small," he said. "The world is wide, and you are the largest thing in it." The next few days were a blur of near misses. She would be leaving the kitchen just as he was arriving home, their shoulders brushing in the narrow hallway. She would find her favourite flowers, peonies deep and red, placed in the centre of the dining table with no note. The physical tension reached a breaking point on the night of their first mandatory public appearance, the Golden Dragon's annual autumn gala. Dae-hyun had sent a gown to her room, a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that hugged her curves and flowed behind her like a river of ink. As she struggled with the intricate row of silk-covered buttons trailing down her spine, a knock sounded. "Ren?" she called out. The door opened, but it wasn't the bodyguard. It was Dae-hyun. He was in a tuxedo, looking so sharp he appeared lethal. He didn't say a word. He walked behind her, his reflection appearing in the vanity mirror. Candace froze as she felt his hands, large, warm, and surprisingly gentle, replace her fumbling fingers. He began to fasten the buttons, one by one. His touch was clinical at first, but as he worked his way up her back, his movement slowed. Through the mirror, she saw his eyes. They weren't focused on the buttons. They were focused on the curve of her shoulder, on the pulse thrumming in her neck. His fingers lingered on the nape of her neck as he fastened the final loop. The air in the room felt like it was vibrating. Candace could hear her own heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that matched the one she had felt on her wedding day, but this time it wasn't from fear. Dae-hyun's hands didn't drop. They stayed on her shoulders, his thumbs lightly brushing the skin just above her collarbone. "No intimacy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The contract." "The contract is a piece of paper, Candace," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "But this is gravity." He didn't kiss her. He didn't have to. The way he looked at her in that mirror was more intimate than any touch. He was claiming her, not as a transaction, but as a person. "Ready?" he asked, his voice returning to its usual composed tone, though his hands lingered a second longer than necessary. "Ready," she said, her chin lifting. As they walked out of the suite, Candace realized that the no intimacy rule was already a lie. The ghost in the hallways had finally been seen, and there was no going back to the shadows. The aftermath of the gala had left a lingering electricity between them, but the morning brought a cold, sharp reality that shattered the fragile peace. Candace was in her kitchen laboratory, perfecting a hibiscus-infused glaze, when her father, Marcus, arrived unannounced. He looked haggard, his suit rumpled and his eyes darting toward the security cameras with a twitch of paranoia. "Candace, honey," he began, his voice shaking as he sat at the marble island. "I need you to listen to me. I've made mistakes." Candace stopped her, whisking, the sugar cooling into a hard amber shell. "What kind of mistakes, Dad? Dae-hyun is already helping with the business reputation." "No, you don't understand." Marcus looked down at his trembling hands. "My construction firm. It wasn't just teetering. I was drowning. I took out a series of high-interest loans to cover the shortfall on the stadium project. I thought Jordan's family would bail me out once you two were married. It was an alliance. But Jordan found out. He realized my company was a sinking ship, And he used that wedding to humiliate us so he could walk away from the debt without looking like the bad guy. Candace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the industrial freezers. Who did you take the loans from, Dad? Marcus couldn't look her in the eye. The Golden Dragon Syndicate. I owed Dae-hyun $15 million. He was going to liquidate everything. The house, the company, my life. The whisk slipped from Candace's hand, clattering onto the floor. So, the marriage. The proposal at the Hilton. It wasn't random chivalry, Candace, her father whispered. Dae-hyun offered to wipe the debt clean in exchange for the marriage. He needed a wife to stabilize his position with the elders, and he needed a way to secure the assets I'd put up as collateral. You were the collateral, honey. He didn't save you. He collected you. The world tilted. Every kind gesture, every rare cookbook, the state-of-the-art kitchen, it all transformed in her mind from acts of respect into the calculated maintenance of an expensive asset. She felt sick. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked out of the kitchen, past her father, and straight to Dae-hyun's study. She didn't knock. Dae-hyun was on a conference call, his face a mask of professional coldness. He looked up, saw the fire in her eyes, and hung up without a word. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice vibrating with a lethal quiet. "Am I just a $15 million line item on your balance sheet?" Dae-hyun stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the room. He didn't look guilty. He looked pragmatic. Your father was reckless. He risked his family's future on a gamble he couldn't win. I simply provided a solution that benefited all parties. A solution? Candace stepped forward, the heat of her anger radiating from her. You let me believe you saw me. You told me I had a warrior's focus. You made me feel like I was finally being respected for who I am, not what I could do for someone. But I was just a debt to be settled. You bought me like a bag of flour. I bought a future, Dae-hyun corrected, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Yes, the debt was the catalyst. I am a businessman, Candace. I do not make $15 million emotional decisions. But when I saw you on that altar, facing Jordan's cruelty with your head held high, I didn't see a debt. I saw the only person in this city with a soul worth investing in. Don't use those words with me, she hissed, tears finally blurring her vision. You used my trauma to trap me. You're no better than Jordan. He wanted to shrink me. You just want to own me. There is a difference between ownership and partnership, Dae-hyun said, stepping around the desk. He stopped just outside her personal space, his presence an overwhelming weight. Jordan wanted to destroy your light because it made him feel small. I want to build a wall around that light so the world can't put it out. If you want to leave, the debt remains. Your father goes to prison, and his company is dismantled. Is that the freedom you want? Candace felt the cage bars slamming shut. He was right, and that made it 1,000 times worse. She was trapped by her father's greed and Dae-hyun's ambition. I'll stay, she said, wiping a stray tear with a defiance that surprised him. I'll honor the contract. I'll be your queen. I'll win over your elders and I'll play the part. But don't you dare pretend this is real. Don't you dare touch me and call it gravity. Dae-hyun's jaw flexed, a single muscle twitching in his cheek. For the first time, he looked like he wanted to say something that wasn't calculated, something raw. But the mask of the golden dragon slid back into place. The elders are coming for dinner on Friday, he said coldly. Ensure the menu is impressive. Candace turned on her heel and walked out. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a vault. She went back to her kitchen, but she didn't pick up the whisk. She picked up a chef's knife. She looked at her reflection in the blade, a woman who had been traded twice by the men who were supposed to love her. You want a queen? She whispered to the empty room. Fine, but I'm going to be the kind that burns the kingdom down if you cross me. She spent the next 12 hours working in total silence. She didn't bake for joy. She baked for war. If she was collateral, she was going to be the most expensive, most dangerous asset he had ever acquired. She began to plan the menu for the elders, each dish a subtle jab at the traditions they held dear, a showcase of her power that they couldn't ignore. That night, she didn't look for Dae-hyun in the library. She locked her bedroom door and pushed a heavy chair against it. She knew he had the key. She knew he owned the house, but she needed him to know that while he might own her time and her name, he hadn't bought a single inch of her heart. In his own room, Dae-hyun stood at the window, staring at the locked door down the hall. He had the 15 million. He had the wife. He had the stability his empire needed. But as he watched the moon rise over the hills, he realized he had never felt more like he was losing. The atmosphere in the mansion had shifted from a cold war to a frozen wasteland. Candice worked with a clinical, detached precision, refusing to look at Dae-hyun even when they shared the same room. The revelation of the debt had stripped away the glamour of her new life, leaving only the bars of the cage. But the universe had a brutal way of demanding attention. 2 days before the summit with the elders, Dae-hyun was scheduled to meet a logistics partner at the Long Beach docks. He had insisted Candice stay behind, but the warrior's focus he once praised made her restless. She was in the garage heading to her car to clear her head when the world turned into a roar of fire and shattered glass. The explosion came from the driveway, a car bomb intended for Dae-hyun's lead SUV. The shockwave threw Candice against the concrete wall, the breath leaving her lungs in a painful rush. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard shouting, the screech of tires and the frantic barking of orders. She scrambled up, her vision swimming, and saw Dae-hyun. He had been shielded by the reinforced door of his sedan, but he was pinned, his security team forming a human wall of lead around him. For a heartbeat, the boss was gone, replaced by a man looking into the face of his own mortality. The attackers were repelled by the sheer firepower of the Golden Dragon Guards, but the damage was done. When the smoke cleared, the mansion's pristine facade was scarred, and the abstract danger of Dae-hyun's world had become a terrifying reality. That night, the house was a tomb. The security was tripled, the gates locked with heavy chains. Candice found herself unable to stay in her room. The silence felt like a physical weight. She walked through the darkened halls until she saw a sliver of light beneath the door of Dae-hyun's private study. She pushed it open slowly. Dae-hyun wasn't at his desk. He was sitting on the floor by the fireplace, the flames casting orange light across his face. He looked older, the sharp edges of his composure softened by exhaustion. In his hand was a framed photograph. "My mother," he said, his voice a hoarse strain of its usual rumble. He didn't look up. He knew it was her by the sound of her step. She was an artist. She painted murals in the streets of Seoul. She believed that beauty was a form of resistance. Candice sat on the floor a few feet away, her anger momentarily eclipsed by the raw grief in his tone. What happened to her? The rivals of my father's time, they thought art was a weakness. They thought that by killing the thing he loved most, they could break him. And they did. He finally looked at her, his eyes glassy. I spent my whole life building walls so high that no one could ever see what was inside. I thought if I was cold enough, I'd be safe. But today? Today you realized the walls can still burn, Candice finished softly. I saw you fall, Dae-hyun whispered, reaching out with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. When the bomb went off, my first thought wasn't my empire. It was that I had brought a creator into a world of destroyers. I told myself I was protecting you, but I just made you a target. In that moment, the Mafia boss vanished. Candice didn't see the man who bought her father's debt. She saw a reflection of her own pain. A person who had used their passion as a shield against a world that wanted to consume them. You didn't make me a target, Dae-hyun. Jordan did that the moment he decided I was a prop. You're the only one who gave me a fortress to fight back from. The tension that had been building for weeks, the resentment, the no intimacy rule, the fear, finally snapped. Dae-hyun moved first, his hand cupping her cheek with a desperation that was almost a plea. Candice didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her heart hammering against her ribs. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a calculated move. It was a collision of two lonely souls. It tasted of salt and smoke and a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. The contract was forgotten. The 15 million was a ghost. There was only the heat of the fire and the sudden, undeniable truth that they weren't just bound by necessity anymore. As the fire died down to embers, they stayed there on the floor, tangled in each other's arms. For the first time, the dragon had let down his guard, and the pastry chef had found a strength that didn't require a kitchen. The morning after the explosion, the mansion was a hive of activity. But the air between Candace and Dae-hyun had shifted from freezing to a low, simmering heat. The kiss hadn't solved their problems, but it had humanized the enemy. However, there was no time for romance. The summit with the Golden Dragon Elders was 48 hours away, and the car bomb had made them bloodthirsty. They didn't just want stability, they wanted a leader who was pure, and many saw a pastry chef from Pasadena as a stain on the lineage. They won't just be tasting your food, Candace, Dae-hyun warned her as she prepped in the sub-level kitchen. They will be looking for cracks in your resolve. If you flinch, they will push for my removal. Then let them push, Candace said, her eyes fixed on a delicate sheet of pulled sugar. I've dealt with critics my whole life, only these ones carry guns instead of pens. She decided to throw out the traditional menu. Instead of trying to blend in, she would stand out. She spent 36 hours straight in the kitchen, her warrior's focus reaching a fever pitch. She wasn't just cooking, she was composing a manifesto. The night of the summit, the dining room was a sea of dark suits and cold expressions. 5 elders, men whose histories were written in the scars on their hands and the bodies buried in the foundations of the city, sat around the mahogany table. Dae-hyun sat at the head, his face a mask of iron. Candace entered, not as a server, but as a general. She had traded her apron for a sleek, structured black jumpsuit, her hair pulled back tight. Tonight, she began, her voice steady, you will not eat a meal. You will eat the history of the Golden Dragon. The first course was a chilled, bitter melon soup topped with a fragile gold leaf honeycomb. Bitter beginnings, she announced, the struggle that built this empire. The elders tasted it, their eyes narrowing. The bitterness was sharp, but the honey smoothed the edge. Course by course, she navigated them through the narrative of the syndicate. A spicy charcoal-grilled octopus to represent the docks and the fire of the 90s. A delicate, multi-layered rice cake to symbolize the complexity of modern trade. The final course was her masterpiece, a dragon's egg. It was a dark chocolate shell, so thin it looked like glass, filled with a vibrant blood-orange mousse and a ginger-infused cake. Innovation is not the enemy of tradition, Candace said, looking directly at the eldest member, a man who had openly called her collateral just an hour prior. It is the armor that keeps tradition alive. You think my art makes this house weak? My art is the reason the world is looking at this table tonight instead of the wreckage on the driveway. She took a small silver hammer and cracked the chocolate shell. The red mousse spilled out, looking like lifeblood. The room was silent. Then the eldest member took a bite. He chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The girl has iron in her sugar, the elder grunted, looking at Dae-hyun. Perhaps your modern methods have some merit after all. The tension in the room broke, not with a bang, but with the clinking of silverware. Candace had done the impossible. She had turned a boardroom of killers into a captive audience. As the elders filed out later that night, offering curt nods of respect that were worth more than any Michelin star, Dae-hyun stayed behind. He walked over to where Candace stood, leaning against the counter, her legs finally shaking from the exhaustion. You won them over, he said, his voice soft with genuine awe. I've seen men try to earn their respect for 20 years and fail. You did it with a dessert. I didn't do it for them, Candace said, looking up at him. I did it for me. I needed to know that I'm not just a debt to be settled. I'm the one who decides what this kingdom tastes like. Dae-hyun reached out, his hand tangling in the hair at the nape of her neck. I know who you are, Candace, and I think, for the first time in my life, I'm terrified of someone. Good, she whispered. You should be. But as they stood in the quiet of the dining room, a shadow moved across the security monitors in the hall. Jordan hadn't disappeared. He had been watching the social media feeds, watching the reports of the successful summit. He had lost his influence, his fiancée, and his pride. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous ingredient of all. Candace just fed the lions and lived to tell the tale. But are you still sitting on the fence? We are heading into the final, most dangerous episodes of my Afro-Korean boss stories. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, you're missing the moment the dragon finally loses control. If you're not subscribing, tell us why in the comments. Are you Team Jordan or just afraid of the heat? Sub now or regret it when the finale drops. The victory over the elders had given Candace a fleeting sense of power, but it had also painted a target on her back. While she and Dae-hyun were beginning to navigate the blurred lines of their contract, the ghost of her past was busy forging a pact in the desert. Jordan Vance was no longer the polished mogul who had stood at the Hilton. Humiliated and bankrupt after Dae-hyun's systematic dismantling of his holdings, he had fled to Las Vegas. There, in a smoke-filled private suite, he met with the head of the Ryukai, a Yakuza clan that had been looking for a way to break the Golden Dragon's hold on the West Coast for decades. Dae-hyun is vulnerable, Jordan told the Yakuza leader, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He's distracted by his new wife. He's soft. Give me the resources, and I'll hand you his empire on a silver platter. Back in Los Angeles, the storm was gathering. It started with the Sugar Queen brand. Just as Candace was preparing for a soft relaunch of her bakery under the protection of the syndicate, a massive lawsuit was filed in federal court. It wasn't just Jordan, it was a coordinated legal assault backed by offshore Yakuza funds, frozen her accounts and stalling production. They aren't just suing you, Candace, Dae-hyun said, looking at the intelligence reports in his study. They are using the legal system to map our movements. Every deposition, every filing. It's a way for them to see where my money is moving. I don't care about the money, Candace said, pacing the room. I care about the people, my head pastry chef. Elena, she hasn't answered her phone in 2 days. Dae-hyun's face went pale. He tapped a button on his desk and the security monitors flickered to life, showing the Long Beach docks. Ren, get a team to the Pasadena site, now. But they were too late. The alliance had moved with surgical precision. While Dae-hyun's security was focused on the mansion and the docks, Jordan had used his knowledge of Candace's routine to strike at her heart. Candace's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, she answered, her heart hammering. Do you remember what you said at the wedding, Candace? Jordan's voice was a jagged edge. About wanting freedom? Well, freedom has a price. I have your precious Elena, and I have the keys to your new kitchen. If you touch her, Jordan, don't threaten me, he hissed. You're the one who chose to sleep with a monster. I'm just the one who's going to show the world what happens when a little baker plays in the dragon's den. Tell Dae-hyun to check his email. I believe he has a business proposal he can't refuse. The email contained a single image, a white rose, Candace's signature flower, dipped in black oil and set on fire. The message was simple. The Golden Dragon ends tonight. Bring the collateral to the Santa Monica Pier. Come alone. Dae-hyun stood, his presence expanding until the room felt too small. He's using you to bait me. He knows I can't let the elders see me lose an asset like this. He wants to execute me in public to prove I'm weak. He doesn't want you, Dae-hyun, Candace said, her voice shaking but her eyes clear. He wants to destroy me because I didn't cry when he mocked me. He wants to see me break. I won't let that happen, Dae-hyun said, checking the magazine of his pistol with a cold, mechanical click. You can't go alone, she argued. It's a trap. It is a war, Dae-hyun corrected, and in a war the king moves to protect the queen. Stay here. Ren will move you to the safe house. But as Dae-hyun sped away in a black-armoured SUV, Candace didn't go to the safe house. She looked at the kitchen, the place where she had found her voice. She looked at the chef's knives, the heavy equipment, and the warrior's focus she had cultivated. She realized that Jordan still saw her as a trophy to be traded. He didn't realize that she had been learning from the dragon. She wasn't the collateral anymore. She was the weapon. She grabbed her keys and a heavy, weighted rolling pin, a custom tool made of solid marble, and headed for the garage. If Jordan wanted a show at the pier, she was going to give him a finale he'd never forget. The Santa Monica Pier was a skeletal neon ghost against the blood-orange sunset. The Pacific Ocean churned below the wooden planks, cold and indifferent. The smell of salt air was choked by the scent of cheap carnival grease and the metallic tang of hidden weapons. Dae-hyun walked the length of the pier alone, his footsteps echoing like a funeral march. Behind the shuttered arcade games and the darkened Ferris wheel, he knew the Ryukai snipers were tracking his heart. He stopped in the center of the boardwalk, his hands visible. "Jordan, show yourself!" Dae-hyun's voice carried over the crashing waves, a roar of command that didn't waver. From the shadows of the darkened carousel, Jordan emerged. He looked unhinged, his expensive suit stained, a frantic light in his eyes that spoke of a man who had traded his soul for a grudge. He wasn't alone. 2 Yakuza enforcers stood behind him, and between them they held Elena, Candace's head chef, with a knife to her throat. "You look lonely, Dae-hyun," Jordan mocked, his voice cracking. "Where's the Queen? Did she realize you only married her to settle a debt? Did she finally see that you're just a shark with a better tailor than me?" "Let the girl go, Jordan," Dae-hyun said, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "This is between us. You want the Empire? You want the revenge? Here I am. Take your shot." "Oh, I'm going to take everything," Jordan hissed. "But first, I want you to watch. I want you to see what happens to the things you value." He signaled to the enforcer holding Elena. Suddenly a heavy metallic clack echoed from the shadows behind the Yakuza. A heavy-duty fire extinguisher hissed, a cloud of white chemical powder exploding into the air and blinding the enforcers. Out of the fog, a figure blurred into motion. It wasn't a soldier. It was Candace. She didn't plead. She didn't scream. She used the marble rolling pin like a mace, swinging it with the warrior's focus that had once been reserved for sugar work. The heavy stone connected with the back of the first enforcer's knee. There was a sickening crack, and he crumbled. "Candace, no!" Dae-hyun shouted, but he didn't waste the opening. He drew his weapon in a fluid motion, his first shot taking out the light above the carousel, plunging the pier into a chaotic strobe of neon and shadow. Jordan spun around, his face a mask of disbelief. "You? You should be at home. You're nothing but a baker." Candace stepped through the chemical fog, her eyes burning with a fire that made Jordan recoil. She wasn't the woman in the ivory cage anymore. She was the woman who had survived the blast, the woman who had won over the elders, the woman who had chosen her own fate. "I'm the woman who's going to finish this," she said. Jordan lunged for her, his movements clumsy and desperate. Candace dodged, a baker's reflex born from years of avoiding hot ovens and sharp blades, and swung the fire extinguisher. The heavy canister caught Jordan in the ribs, sending him gasping to the wooden planks. Dae-hyun was a whirlwind of lethal efficiency, neutralizing the remaining Yakuza as his own men, Ren and the Golden Dragon Elite, emerged from the shadows of the amusement park. They had been waiting for his signal, but Candace had provided the catalyst. Dae-hyun reached Candace just as she stood over a groaning Jordan. He looked at her, at the smudge of grease on her cheek, the fire in her eyes, and the marble tool in her hand. He didn't see an asset. He didn't see collateral. He saw his equal. "I told you to stay at the safe house," Dae-hyun said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer hide. "I've spent my life being told where to stay," Candace replied, her voice shaking but her chin held high. "I didn't need you to save me, Dae-hyun." Dae-hyun looked at the chaos around them, at the terrified but rescued Elena, and then back at the woman who had just dismantled a Yakuza hit squad with kitchen tools. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl from her face. "I know," he said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face, a smile that reached his eyes for the first time. "But I'm glad I came." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining. The contract had been fulfilled. The enemies were vanquished. Jordan was dragged away into the night by Ren's men, his legacy reduced to a stain on the boardwalk. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Candace and Dae-hyun walked off the pier together. They left the wreckage of their past behind, walking into a future that was no longer written in ink, but in the heat of a choice they had finally made for themselves. The morning after the pier was quiet, not the heavy, suffocating silence of a cage, but the peaceful stillness of a house that had finally seen the sun. The Hollywood Hills mansion felt different. The sharp edges of the glass and steel seemed to have softened, or perhaps it was just that Candace no longer saw them as bars. She stood in her kitchen, the one Dae-hyun had built for her, but she wasn't working on a commission. She was baking for pleasure. The smell of yeast and Madagascar vanilla filled the air, a domestic rebellion against the metallic tang of the previous night's violence. Dae-hyun entered the room, not as the shadow-clad boss, but in a simple linen shirt. He stopped at the island, watching her pipe delicate florets of buttercream onto a small sponge cake. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, his gaze lingering on the steady grace of her hands. "The elders have called," he said softly. "They are impressed. The Ryu Kai has retreated to Vegas, and the debt your father owed has been officially moved to the resolved column. You are free, Candace. The contract is fulfilled." Candace paused, the piping bag poised in mid-air. "Free?" she repeated. It was the word she had prayed for at the Hilton, the word that was supposed to be her North Star, but now it felt hollow. Dae-hyun reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He set it on the marble counter next to her flour-dusted station. "This was my mother's. She didn't have much, but she had this. She said that a ring shouldn't be a chain. It should be a compass. It should remind you where home is." Candace looked at the box, but didn't open it yet. "The year isn't up, Dae-hyun." "Why now?" "Because a contract is for people who don't trust each other," he said, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I don't want a year of your time, Candace. I want a lifetime of your focus. I don't want a queen because the syndicate demands it. I want a partner because I am a better man when I am standing in your light." He didn't make a business proposal. He didn't mention assets or security. He looked at her with a raw, terrifying honesty. "If you want to go back to Pasadena, to your old life, I will build you the finest bakery in the country. I will be your silent benefactor. But if you stay, you won't be collateral. You will be the heart of this house." Candace felt the weight of the last few months, the shame of the wedding, the fear of the bomb, the adrenaline of the pier. She realized that Jordan had tried to buy her pride and her father had sold her safety, but Dae-hyun was the only one who had ever offered her a choice. She picked up the velvet box and opened it. Inside was a simple antique gold band set with a single brilliant emerald, the color of growth and new beginnings. "I don't want to go back to my old life," she said, her voice clear and strong. That woman was waiting for someone to give her permission to exist. This woman, she's busy building an empire. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "But the apron stays, Dae-hyun. I'm a chef first." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he murmured. He pulled her into his arms, and this time the kiss didn't taste of desperation or smoke. It tasted of honey and hope. The golden dragon and his queen stood in the center of their kingdom, not bound by the ink of a contract, but by the fire of a choice. As the sun climbed higher over the hills, Candace looked out at the city below. She wasn't a pawn anymore. She wasn't collateral. She was the one who decided how the story ended. And as she leaned her head against Dae-hyun's shoulder, she knew that their real story, the one not written in ledgers, was only just beginning. They survived the fire, and Candace finally got the crown she deserved. But what about you? If you've made it this far and haven't subscribed to my Afro-Korean boss stories, you're missing out on the family we're building here. Are you really going to walk away after everything we've been through together? If you're not hitting that button, tell us why in the comments. Be honest. But for the loyal ones, get ready. Next week, we're dropping the Korean Mafia boss's forbidden surrogate. Imagine a man who has everything but the one thing he's forbidden to touch, and a woman who has nothing left to lose but her heart. The twist in this story will literally leave you breathless. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single second of the heat. See you in the next story.